All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 220. And today, um, good news on the in-depth review front. I got the next in-depth review recorded. Hopefully going to be uploading it later tonight. It should go live sometime tomorrow. Hopefully. So that's cool. Finally starting to get down some of that backlog there. But today, I had kind of an interesting idea, and I wanted to have a bit of a thought discussion, thought experiment with all of you lovely people. So, again, really digging Draw Steel. Been looking over it from a more like game design perspective. Where I'm looking at, okay, well, these are the choices that they made, and this is how they kind of define these various things. And it got me thinking about class-based TTRPGs and skills specifically. So, we've talked about skill systems before. Effectively, in a TTRPG, you basically have like a couple different systems and aspects of the TTRPG that all have to kind of work together. In 5th edition, they call them the 3 pillars of RPGs. And those pillars are role-playing, exploration, and combat. And if we go all the way back to old like BECME, like original D&D, the role playing really wasn't defined in the system. It was something that the DM basically had to kind of come up with themselves. And your character was basically, this is how you interact with combat. Like, that's basically what made your character interesting. And they kind of divided it into originally 3 different kind of flavors. You had fighting men they used weapons and they fought. Then you had magic users who would use magic and they would fight. And then you had your clerics, and they would use magic and heal. And that was basically the 3 different ways you could interact with combat, which is still how most TTRPGs work now. You have your martial-based classes, your magic-based classes, and then your healing-based classes. They eventually added a 4th class, which was the thief, which technically worked in combat similarly to the fighting man, but the thing that the thief did that the fighting man couldn't was dealing with stuff outside of combat. They could find traps and do all those kind of thiefy like things. And that kind of started us on something that I don't think has really been challenged that much, which is the idea that your class in a class-based RPG defines how you interact with both combat and out of combat, both exploration and role-playing. And despite the fact that combat and then non-combat technically use 2 very different systems. For combat, you have the combat system. Generally, there's some sort of an initiative. There is an action economy that decides what you can do on your turn. Things like that. And you have things like armor class and all that stuff. And then for all the other interactions that your character can do, they use what I refer to as the skill system, which is basically everything that doesn't involve combat that your character can do. And that's where you get things like sleight of hand and stealth, and all those other things. Does that mean that you can't use those in combat? No, but they're not specifically designed to interact with combat. They're designed to kind of deal with everything else. And again, for a really, really long time, your choice of skills, so basically all the stuff that you do outside of combat, has been defined by your class, which again, when it originally was created, the class was basically, this is how you interact with combat. And no one has really argued against the idea of, well, yeah, well, your class should somewhat help define how you just interact with the world in general. It doesn't matter that it's defining both your combat abilities and your non-combat abilities, because your class is like your major defining factor. Well, when we get to be perfectly honest, once we got to 5th edition, did a D&D, and it kind of somewhat showed up in 4th edition, but it wasn't 100% defined there. 5th edition made the idea of having a background required to have a character, and your background, especially early backgrounds, like in the 2014 core book, they were effectively, they were just like a collection of skills and tool proficiencies. So that was how you got a decent amount of your skills. Every so often, one of the races might have a skill associated with it that you would get something, but for the most part, you got all your skills from your class, and then your background would be the one thing that would allow you to create some kind of different style of your class. Good example, my Shadow Monk that I played in D&D 5th edition, Aether. He was a monk. However, I wanted him to basically be a rogue without having to be a rogue, and be able to basically take the place of a rogue if we didn't have one. Because the other aspects of my Shadow Monk made them a very, very good rogue, and in certain instances, a better rogue than a rogue. Because I could teleport and run up walls and do all these other cool stuff that made me very, very good at scouting ahead and things like that. Eventually, I could even turn invisible, and that's fun. So, I took the criminal background, which gave me proficiency with thieves' tools, which is really the only skill that most rogues use that I couldn't get access to being a monk. And it made for a really, really great character. But it got me to thinking, why does your class have to also define your role-playing? Now, we've talked before, especially when we were doing Fabula Ultima stuff, we've talked before about the idea of like your class fantasy. They actually talk about that in the Fabula Ultima core book pretty explicitly, and in each additional book where they add new classes, they go, well, this is kind of the core fantasy, or the class fantasy of this particular class, as a way to really make your players feel involved in the storytelling. So the idea of, the paladin, being that champion of justice and stuff like that. So yeah, it makes sense that they'd be able to persuade and stuff like that. Or if we go 4th edition, they'd have a high diplomacy score. So again, that does make sense. But what if it didn't? What if we chopped off the skills being built into the class and made your skills, basically the ways you interact with the rest of the world, a completely separate thing that you get to choose, and your class being pretty exclusively built around combat? And I've been kicking around this idea for a little while now, the idea that, again, the kind of standard TTRPG breakdown of race, background, class. Your race and your background basically are useful at character creation, and that's generally about it. They'll give you some proficiencies. A lot of times your race will give you your movement in some way, shape, or form. And then your background, again, will give you a few skills and stuff like that. But your class is the only thing that levels up, that gets more powerful as you go. So these two other things just, no, they go away. And you don't really have to worry about them anymore. With a few rare exceptions, things like tieflings, as you level up, would eventually start getting access to more spells and things like that. That was really the only time you ever saw your class or your race actually do things. But what if instead of your class being the single most important thing about your character, you really did get to kind of mix and match and create. Like if you wanted to have a rogue style character where they're really good at kind of espionage, secret-y type stuff. They can pick locks. They can sneak around really well. But in combat, you want them to be different. Like maybe you want them to be a rogue-style character out of combat, but in combat, they have access to amazing magic powers. So you basically have a rogue wizard kind of thing. Would that break anything? Is that one of the things that kind of balances out the rogue, for instance? In combat, rogues are kind of a one-trick pony. And this is not exclusive to D&D. Most games where you have a rogue, in combat, you are kind of a one-trick pony. You try to get your sneak attack, backstab, whatever they're going to call it in your TTRPG. You have this ability where under certain instances you can do big spikes of damage. And that's really all you do. You sneak around, you try and set up sorry, I had something on my glasses. You try and set up the situation you need to get your extra damage, and then you go and hide again. And because in combat, rogues are kind of one note, outside of combat, they get to do all these cool, different things. But what if they weren't? What if the way you interact with combat was a completely different choice as the way you interact with the world? And Draw Steel kind of does that to a point. And what I mean by that is when you look at backgrounds, quote unquote, in Draw Steel, they actually come in two parts. You have the culture. When I was talking about it last week, I couldn't remember the three parts of it. So the culture is literally just a collection of skills, but it's framed in a very narrative-focused way. So you have basically, is it just 3 or is it 4? I believe it's just 3 parts. So you have the environment, you have the organization, and you have the upbringing, right? Yeah. So environment, organization, upbringing. And basically what that does, it just defines the three kind of aspects of the culture that you grew up in. Each one of those is going to give you access to a skill and maybe something else. And then you have your careers, which is an actual job that you did. And that will give you access to skills. It'll give you some renown, possibly change your wealth level. And you get to pick a perk, which is kind of like a feat, but it's a little bit different. And so I was thinking more and more about this. Yes, in Draw Steel, each one of the classes does give you some skills. Like for the Censor, you can choose any 2 skills from interpersonal or lore skill groups. That's a whole nother thing that we're not going to go into here, but they have skill groups and things like that because Matt Colville likes that. So you do get something about how you interact with the world outside of combat from your class. But compared to, like, if we go to 5th edition, you generally get anywhere between 3 to 5 skills built into your class, and then you'll get like 2 more from your background. So the majority of your skills come from your class. And I just don't, I understand why, and it works perfectly fine. And it means that when you're designing classes like the Ranger or the Rogue, you can be a little bit more creative with how you build them, because it's not just exclusively, hey, this is how you interact with combat. It's also, this is how you interact with the rest of the world. And that, without that ability, like the Ranger, creating a Ranger that is exclusively a combat thing and leaving skills and things like that to a completely different part of the system, means that you really do have to work much, much harder to make the Ranger seem different when you also have a fighter that can do most of the things that the Ranger can do. And because of how much they simplified the skill system in 5th edition compared to like 4th and 3rd edition, the Ranger kind of got a bit of the short stick on that, because a lot of the skills from especially 3rd edition that would have been very, very useful as a Ranger were all kind of put into like nature and survival. And that was really it. So all of the different cool things that a Ranger could do is kind of just boiled down to, well, is it a nature role or is it a survival role? So, yeah. This is a weird video, and I don't quite have all of my thoughts defined because my brain hasn't been working super well today. But I just thought it would be really, really interesting that instead of having every class, be the absolute most important thing, being able to kind of a la carte create your characters with, your skill set being completely separate from your combat set, on your class being for combat and your background or whatever you want to call it being for skills. I think that would make for very interesting, unique characters. Like, what if you were a paladin that just also happens to be very, very knowledgeable in general, has a lot of knowledge skills, very, very good at remembering things and learning things. Super smart paladin. That could create something interesting, a scholar paladin, or a very, very persuasive fighter. Or like a monk that, is just really, really into nature. Again, it's a weird idea, and I'm wondering if anyone else has ever thought about this idea of just completely detaching the idea of your skills from your class, and the classes being exclusively, this is how you interact with combat. Again, it requires designing classes differently. Because you can no longer kind of justify, well, the reason that the rogue is kind of boring in combat is they get all of these other skills. Well, now all those other skills are in a completely different system, so you would have to come up with a more unique way to create a rogue. And on the flip side, even the more combat-oriented, the more unique combat-oriented things like fighters or paladins, where they do have much more things that they can do in combat. You chop out the skills aspect of it, basically how they interact with the world, and it still means that you're going to have to come up with some more interesting ways to kind of define them, because at that point, the difference between a fighter and a paladin is effectively smiting. So yeah, interested to hear from you guys. Do you think I am just talking nonsense because that's how my brain is working right now? Or do you like the idea of this kind of a la carte build of a character, where your class is literally just, hey, this is how you interact with combat. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.